as you know, there's a pretty large left, self-described left podcast world on which I wasn't invited. In fact, aside from Katie Halper, I would say the fairest, Chris Hedges was perfect, but it was
Hmm.
short. It's a time slot, it's a half hour. Um, the biggest audiences I got were places where you would least expect. It wasn't a Glenn Greenwald, it was a Michaela Peterson. And she's the daughter of Jordan Peterson. Doesn't seem to be, I can't tell, a particularly political person, but she was extremely respectful, and she was an intense listener. And she gave me quite a large amount of time, I guess maybe 2 hours, I don't recall now. And that was judging by this phenomenon called views. I don't know much about internet culture, but it got about, I think, 350,000 views.
Yeah, 385. I have it open right here right now. Unfortunately, I found out about it when I heard you mention at the end of that comedy show that you did. Well, not comedy show, the comedy name
Right.
podcast you did.
And then there was the interview with Noam Dworman, the comedy club fellow. Um, and he too gave me a block of, I think, 2 hours and 30 minutes, something like that. So I think it's a bit of an illusion that I've done a lot of interviews, places where people wanted to see me, places like Democracy Now!, Piers Morgan, Russell Brand, Glenn Greenwald, Brianna Joy Gray, Crystal Ball. No, I was not on any of those programs.
Interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say Pierce yet, but I mean, since you've been
I
on
would
these,
imagine, I thought maybe they, I don't know. I would have imagined they are open to it, but maybe, I don't, who knows?
I'm just being factual. You asked me a question and I'm giving you a factual
No, no,
answer.
no.
but I mean, you went on all these other, I guess, non-leftist, actually bigger shows, kind of, no? I mean,
Much bigger audience.
Peterson's daughter. And does that say anything to you that these kind of people or such shows are kind of receptive of
Oh,
hearing
I,
your takes?
I will say two things. For somebody like myself who's been around the block on this issue for 40 years, so that's circling the block many times and watching some stores close down and new stores open up, and new neighbors, old neighbors moving out and new neighbors moving in. I would say two things. Number one, um, the comments people tell me, because they send me the comments. So if you take the Michaela Peterson show and the comedy club show, have been overwhelmingly favorable to me.
I was blown away by the comments in the Comedy Cellar one. That's the one I've watched and looked at the comments. It was incredible.
And then you have to juxtapose that next to another critical fact. That is, I didn't pull any punches. I wasn't wearing kid gloves. I kept saying concentration camp. I kept saying genocide. And it was interesting to watch the reaction of the other people in the room. At some point, I think they realized I wasn't going to budge. So you're going to have to live with me saying that, even though in a past time, it would have a fury would have erupted, and somebody would either leave the room or indicate it was time for me to leave the room, or they would pull the plug. Or if it were a place like BBC, they would be utterly terrorized at the prospect that at the end of this interview, they are going to be summarily fired. So I held my ground. I wouldn't budge. And the second thing was, now I don't want to put words in Noam Dworman's mouth, let alone Eli Lake or the other woman in the room, Periel Asherand. But you got the feeling that at a certain point, with the exception of Eli Lake, at a certain point, they sort of came around to the idea, well, these analogies are crazy, but they're not that crazy. They're not so off the wall. When you recite the facts, and you put in the context of what's going on, that Israel on October 8th had laid out a murder plan. That's just very straightforward. It said that there's no distinction between civilians and combatants in Gaza. It said we're not admitting any water, electricity, fuel, or food. And it said we're not going to do this for a very long time. This is going to be a long operation. Well, those are the three statements said by three senior officials of Israel, the defense minister, the prime minister, and the president. And you add them up, that's a murder plan. That's genocide. It's not complicated. Sometimes it's complicated because they say, well, in genocide, technically you have to show intent. But as any person in law knows, that if the natural and inevitable consequence of your act is genocide, then your intent is genocide. You don't have to have the statement, we're going to kill everybody. If the natural and inevitable result of denying food, water, fuel, and electricity to a population for a sustained period of time is the extermination or annihilation of that population, then you're intending genocide. So it's not a complicated, in this particular case, the charge of genocide is just not very complicated. So that was, to me, the two observations. If you group them together, the overwhelmingly positive reception, I'm told by correspondents, the fact that I didn't use any euphemisms, and the fact that I was allowed to proceed without the...
Did you have to, refresh your memories on the research and stuff? It seemed like you were prepared for the debate. You knew it seemed like a university, like sort of a debate. So you seemed prepared.
Unfortunately, because of what's called economies of time, which is just a fancy term for there are only 24 hours in a day, I had to make a decision between answering email and doing research. And the email has gotten totally out of hand. It's now consuming about 8 hours a day.
Oh, geez.
And I'm really going mad. No, I really am. I'm laughing, but it's not funny at all. I'm just a few moments ago, I was lying down in bed. I covered my head and I said, no, really, what's wrong if you die now?
No.
That was it.
I'm just
hard.
Then I had to look, and then I had to dread the prospect of doing a podcast with these guys named Sam and Cam.
Oh no.
This is a break.
Well, hopefully you'll feel a bit more energized after this and go back to emails people asking you.
If I didn't have to endure enough misery.
But Norman, what do you think of, now let's put aside the podcast world and all that, comparing this to all the other, I was going to say flare up, but maybe that's not the good word, but all the other incidents, wars, everything between Israel and Palestine over the years that you worked on. Is this one of the more shocking, surprising, interesting? What would you say about what is happening compared to the previous ones 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and etc.?